Hey guys, thanks for joining O'Connor Muscle Systems. Today's workout's going to be hamstrings and glutes. All right, when we get started with this workout, we're definitely going to need a good, proper warm-up. So in this video, you're going to see bits and pieces of that warm-up, but if you want to check out the full, proper lower body warm-up for general population and athletics, go to the description box and click on the link to go to that video. All right, so here we go. When we get into the hamstring work, we're going to go ahead and start with stability ball hamstring curls. Now, this movement is pretty awesome, but it's going to take some stability in the hips and the ankles and a lot of hamstring strength. Okay, so what I like to do on this one is I like to drive my heels or right around the Achilles tendon, right on the top of the ball, drive it hard into the ball, and then as I squeeze, I'm kind of thrusting my hips up and flexing hard with the hamstrings as far as I can into my butt. Now, I'm never pushing with my head. I'm always driving off my shoulders and squeezing my hamstrings. You do not want to put a lot of pressure on the neck while performing this movement. So I performed 2 sets of 15 on this one, with as good a technique as I could possibly do and as much tension in the hamstrings as possible. All right, so now when we move on to the next movement, it's going to be a TRX lying hamstring curl, right? We're going to drive our heels in the straps that look like little U's. Now, this is another very unstable movement, but this is a little harder movement, okay? With this movement, we're going to be laying flat on our back with our feet just barely elevated. The strap should be hanging about 3 inches off the ground. And we're going to go ahead and do 3 sets of 12 reps on this. And with this movement, we want to be squeezing the hamstrings very, very hard, but we also want to be thrusting the hips up. Okay, so when you squeeze the hamstrings, you're thrusting the hips up, and then you're lowering down nice and slow and controlled. Now, if you have a hard time completing this particular movement because it's too difficult, there's a couple different movements that you're going to see me do in this where you can regress the movement a little bit and make it a little easier. All right, so check out those movements here, and then you'll notice how it gets a little bit easier if you do it those particular ways than if you do it the first way I started, with full extension, full flexion of the hamstrings and the glutes. This movement works both the hamstrings and the glutes though. So it's a great movement for both, and it works the knee at flexion and the hips at extension. So it works exactly the full range of motion for the hamstrings. That's why I like starting with it. All right, then we're going to move over to Bulgarian split squats. Now, I really like Bulgarian split squats because they work every part of the leg, but they really work the hamstrings and glutes, especially if you sit back in the movement and use the heel to push off of. When you use the heel to push off of, you flex the hamstrings and glutes really hard without killing the quads. Watch as I drop into the movement with my weight shifting back into my heel or the foot that's on the ground. And then as I drive up, I'm trying to thrust my hips forward and flex the hamstrings and glutes more than I am trying to push straight into the floor. Now, as you sit back, you cannot put your pressure on that back foot. That back foot should just be used as stability and not as a force pushing down into the bench. If you do this, you'll get extra stress in the rectus femoris muscle in that back leg, but you'll also create a lot of torque on the knee. So unless we're like athletes working on jumping power or something like that, do not utilize pushing off of that back leg. That's going to be for specific programming. Okay, so I did 3 sets of 20 reps each leg, and today I went light. So this can be used for anywhere in between 6 reps for heavy days all the way up to 20 reps. for light days. All right, and I use the bar on the back technique. You can use dumbbells in either hand, which I'll probably film in a later video. You could use a kettlebell holding it on your chest, kettlebell in one hand, kettlebell in the other hand. You can use multiple different ways to stress out the body with this one, which is why it's such a great movement. But today I used the bar on the back, centered my weight, and then try to utilize the weight back on my hips a little bit more so my glutes and my hamstrings can get more tension. All right? And then now the last movement we're going to get into is going to be the just traditional lying hamstring curl on a machine. Now this one is probably the one most people utilize, but can also be done with a lot more effectiveness if properly executed. So when you lie on this, make sure your knees are at the edges of the mat, right where the axis of rotation is supposed to be. So there's usually a red dot or some type of wheel looking thing where your knee should be at. Try and get as close to that as possible. And then as you pull and squeeze your hamstrings, you are going to want to thrust your hips into the pad and flex the leg. You do not want to let your butt raise up in the air when you're trying to flex your hamstrings. Okay? Like I said in an earlier part of this video, the hamstrings work under knee flexion and hip extension. So you want to try and extend the hips into the pad or push the hips into the pad at the same time as you flex your knee. Now, as you bring it closer and closer to your butt, you want to squeeze as hard as you can and then try and lower under control with the hamstrings, not the calves. Pro tip here, if you're feeling your calves too much, then curl your toes in towards your shins. Okay, so flex your toes or your whole ankle in towards your shins, and that will disengage your calves, and you should be able to get more hamstring engagement. All right, with this movement, I went 2 sets to failure, and I did 15 reps with as much control as I possibly could. And actually on this last set, I did a drop set, a triple drop set, because hamstrings is a weakness for me and I like to try and hit them as best as I can with as much intensity as possible. So I overloaded a little bit higher weight and then started dropping down for a triple drop set. This can be utilized in any program, but you just have to know when and where to put it in so you don't overtrain the muscle and have a hard time recovering. All right, guys, I hope you really loved this style of video we did. Please write any comments below of how you like the video, what you want to hear or learn in a later video. Like and subscribe, and I really appreciate everything you guys have been doing for me. I love the views. Have a great day.